Luke chapter 12, verses 54 to 59, the Good is New translation. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds who were listening in all of this. You are very good at forecasting the weather. If you see clouds coming up from the sea, you say, "There's rain on the way," and you are right. If the wind changes to come from the desert, you say, "We are in for a hot spell." Right again. You have double standards. You like to show how bright you are in understanding the weather, but you turn a blind eye to what's happening in the world at large and pretend to be dull. Isn't it time you learned to have an opinion of your own? Think things out and come to a realistic view of your situation before matters are taken out of your hands and you find you have no choices left. Once you've lost your freedom, it's hard to get it back again. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Dear friends, this Sunday's lectionary reading may sound surprising at first. Jesus uses a simple weather forecast to teach us about Christian epistemology. About what? Christian what, you might ask? Christian epistemology. You see, I learned my English at the seminary in Edinburgh, which might explain why I sometimes sound a bit unusual. I don't just pronounce only my rolling R's, which it's partly Czech upbringing. I occasionally use British spelling when I'm writing to you and say a wee loch for a little lake and other things like that. Seminary English came with a theological vocabulary, and that's how I ended up with words like epistemology, this mouthful, isn't it? It's one of those handy words, one-word summaries that would otherwise need a full sentence, and I will now try. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge, especially in regards of method, validity, and scope. Not much better. No. Well, there is another version. Epistemology is about what we know, how we know it, and why it matters. That's a little better. And that's exactly the focus of Jesus' teaching here in this pericope. In our reading, Jesus invites us, his followers, to practice a faith that is attentive to God's truth in the real world. When you see a cloud rising in the west, you immediately say, "It's going to rain," and it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, "There will be scorching heat," and it happens again. Jesus uses an elemental weather forecast to teach us something essential about our faith and how we should orientate our lives before God and in our world. So this picture here shows a monsoon storm in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. If you see this, you should seek shelter. Stay away from tall trees or cacti, as I talked with kids, and certainly avoid dry riverbeds. It might be bone dry, but it might not be for long. Even if the storm is miles away and you see that just far behind the horizon, make sure that you stay away from dry riverbeds. Just as we make practical decisions about the weather, Jesus takes this everyday observation about the everyday weather and turns it into a teaching moment. He points to the pragmatism and realism of our faith. We should apply the same good sense, common knowledge, to guide our spiritual lives. Our faith is anchored in the realities of the world. We do not live on speculation or wishful thinking. Our faith is not pie in the sky. We do not inhabit cloud castles. But real clouds do matter. If they come from the sea, they bring long-expected rain. And likewise, our faith must be pragmatic and realistic. Truth and its correspondence with reality. Truth and its correspondence with reality. Truth matters, especially for Christian faith. Why even say this? You might ask. Isn't it self-evident? It might be for you and for me and for many people, but sadly, it isn't always so in our society. Do you remember the Sharpie improved hurricane map? This one. Yes. In 2019, the president mistakenly named Alabama among the states in the path of the storm. And instead of admitting a slip of a tongue, he stubbornly insisted that Alabama indeed would be hit. It went so far that he used his ubiquitous Sharpie marker to correct the official weather map. Vanity, pettiness, and inability to admit error turn into epistemological farce. That is exactly what Jesus warns us again in this pericope. Sometimes such behavior is funny. Yeah, Sharpie improved weather map is funny. But it can also have serious consequences. Remember when it was seriously suggested to stop testing for the virus so that the infection numbers would go down. As if fewer tests would change reality. Or just last week when bad employment numbers came out, the professional sociologist who reported those numbers was summarily fired. Who knows if experts will be allowed to provide reliable data to guide our economy through this troubled time. The real path of a storm cannot be altered even by the most powerful Sharpie in the world. A pandemic will not disappear if we stop testing. An economy will not improve by silencing statisticians. Jesus' weather parable teaches us Christian epistemology. And that means here truth does matter. And for us, it is part of our religion, friends. Jesus commands us to pay attention to how it matches with the reality around us. And here is a picture from 2011 as we set out for our first climb to the summit of Mauna Loa. Behind my wife Martina and our rental Jeep is the Mauna Loa Observatory, those white house buildings there. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a bare slopes of high volcano in altitude of 3.5 kilometers, which means above 11,000 feet above sea level. For decades, scientists there have been measuring atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, CO2. Early on, they saw not only seasonal oscillations, which you can see, it looks almost like the teeth of a saw, but also they noticed the relentless relentless rise. On our first visit to that observatory, I said 2011, the value was still below 400 parts per million. Last week, it was nearly 426. And it was, or it is now, over 100 ppm, parts per million, higher than when measurements began almost 70 years ago, at the end of 1950s, the beginning of 1960s. And rising CO2 is not slowing and is deeply concerning scientists, but also people with heart and understanding for nature, people of faith. I'm part of Presbyterians for Earth Care, our denominational body which is trying to argue exactly this case. This brings us to Jesus' second point he is making. Christian epistemology knows about urgency. Pay attention to reality and act while there is still time. Act while there is still time. Think carefully. Come to a realistic understanding of your situation before matters slip beyond your control and choices vanish. The red curve in the CO2 chart is a stark reminder of that urgency. And it applies beyond climate to our daily lives. For instance, to protecting refugees and asylum seekers, to defending the undocumented. Our clerk of session, Beth Childs, recently reminded us of Pastor Martin Niemöller from Germany, famous words which he said in relations with the Nazism in Germany. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. He regretted the missed possibilities and unrecognized urgency. We could rewrite this appeal like Beth did that for our Hispanic neighbors, that urgency of our own day. First, they banned Muslims. Do you remember that? Then they went after university students for protesting genocide. Then they went after undocumented neighbors and started to summon them up by masked vigilante, how would you call them, officially police force, federal police force in unmarked vehicles. Or we can also say, first they send the Marines and federalized National Guards to Los Angeles, then to Washington, D.C. Next, it could be Portland, Chicago, or our own New York City with troops on the streets. So friends, Jesus calls us to read the weather, and I would apply it, of course, as you heard me, much broader. Weather in the sky, but also in our society. Read it with our eyes opened and our minds tuned, especially to the cries of those who are being oppressed, and our hearts attentive, just like Jesus did so often in his own time. To be people of truth, people of courage, people whose eyes are open, not easily deceived, and whose hands are ready for the work for God's kingdom. And under God's kingdom, understand God's appeal for justice and for peace. We do this when we protect the vulnerable. Just like in our church, in Asylum Clinic, which is gathering here, and we help them to find and file for asylum, hopefully gaining for them an extra layer of protection. We do this when we stand for peace, like our church being officially and by declaration of the session, Church of Peace. We do this when we bear witness to God's justice in the public square, like for instance on vigils on Monday, interfaith vigils on Monday on Columbus Circle. Has been gathering now there for months and months, and we've been, some of us, participating there from 5:30 through 6 o'clock. You can join us. We do this because we understand there is the truth, God's truth, and we understand the urgency of the time. We are to be the people who see the clouds rising and prepare, who feel the south wind blowing and act, who live our faith with realism, urgency, and hope, preparing the day when justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Amen.